with his law firm, he saw on a daily basis the impact that the old law had on those that were in the industry. Small businesses that had very short margins, did not have a lot of cash flow, were impacted by the legislation as it was then written, Mr. Chair. And I know that the leader of our party has done a lot of work in trying to push this issue, both here in the House and behind the scenes, to ensure that we were able to bring something forward. I'm glad to see it was brought forward. I know we heard from the construction industry, we heard from the trades at the Law Amendments Committee. A lot of the work they did, Mr. Chair, I think a lot of influence they had on this legislation. They may have wanted a few other things, but like anything in legislation, compromises are made, and I think most of us can say that the legislation is better now, hopefully when it passes today or tomorrow, that it's better now than it was before these changes, and I look forward to any further debate we may have on this bill.
Shall the Minister of Justice?
Let's speak on the title.
Sure. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll just rise a few minutes to speak on the title as well. Just to rise and first of all begin by thanking the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, who obviously are one of the strong advocates and supporters for this piece of legislation, which really will bring Nova Scotia's Builders Lien Act into the mainstream of building lien legislation in this country. It updates the time frames for filing liens, eliminates a number of anachronisms in the Nova Scotia law, and generally improves our building lien legislation and brings it in line with many other Canadian jurisdictions. I would like to echo the comments of the House Leader for the official opposition, insofar as he referred to the good work of the Law Reform Commission of Nova Scotia, who did valuable work on this bill, and whose report was really at least the basis on which the drafting began for the bill. And I'd also like to thank the Leader of the Opposition, because I know he was also an advocate for this bill, and I'd like to thank as well the support of the Liberal Party, who as well supported this bill through committee and in the House earlier. I really think this is a classic example of good legislation developed through a good process that will benefit all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, we really have in this bill a real step forward in the civil law in Nova Scotia that affects real, ordinary Nova Scotians in many practical ways. Because as all of us who've had practiced law will know, that it's one thing to have our clients do work. It's quite another thing to have them paid for that work, that hard work they do. This bill goes some distance in helping make sure that those hardworking Nova Scotians get paid. And with that, I sit down.
On Bill 58, shall the clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry.
An act to amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics Lien Act.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 62, the Financial Measures 2004 Act?
Bill number 62, an act respecting certain financial measures. I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to talk on the title of the Financial Measures Act, and I should just say that I probably will speak for some time on title if members may want to take that into account. I intend to repeat the highlights of what I'm about to say on third reading.
Order, please. Order. If other members would like to carry on some private conversations, if they could take them outside. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just saying that for those members who don't wish to listen to my entire discourse, I'll be repeating the highlights. Well, I know you want to hear them, Mr. Chairman. I know. But for the others, I intend to repeat the highlights during debate on third reading. But this is a very important piece of legislation, and I did want to take some time to talk about the significance of it in the life of this particular government and in the life of the province, because of course we very loosely talk about the budget having already passed, but it hasn't, of course. What is passed are the estimates, and the other piece of the puzzle is the Financial Measures Act. And we still, that piece of the budget still hasn't come to a vote. Now, there's like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fit together, of course, because the estimates contain the government's allocation of funds for its program, but in order to change the law in keeping with the government's program as outlined in the budget, they need to pass a separate piece of legislation, and that is the Financial Measures Act. Now, the Financial Measures Act is what is often referred to as an omnibus bill. And that means that it covers literally a couple of dozen different subject matters. There is no one thread that goes through them all. And that was never more true than of this bill. Now, I said on second reading that the government should not assume that we would support the passage of every piece of this bill through Committee of the Whole House, because there are a number of pieces in the bill that simply did not belong there, shouldn't have been in there, and that I believe should never have been contemplating as being part of the Financial Measures Act. And I think it's important when we're speaking on title, Mr. Speaker, to talk about why that is and why that particular principle is important. The Financial Measures Act is a matter of confidence in the government, which is something that now, in this day and age, we only see once a year. We only see once a year, and that's around budget time. That is when this House gets to say whether a majority of its members have confidence in the government. And if this House does not have confidence in the government, then the government falls, and there must be an immediate election. The last time we saw that principle at work, of course, was in 1999, just a little later than this, only 5 years ago, when the last Liberal government lost the confidence of the House. The budget was defeated, and we went to an immediate election, where the Liberal Party was put in their rightful place, Mr. Speaker, namely third.
Order, please. Would the honourable member allow for an introduction?
I thought you were going to ask me if I'd answer one of your questions. Yes, of course I would, Mr. Chairman.
As the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your indulgence. I'd like to introduce a group of students that are with us, grade 8 students from Park West School in Clayton Park West. And there are 35 students with us today with their teacher, Erin Driscoll. And two parents with them are chaperones, Barb Miller and Jennifer Mills. And I wonder if the students and chaperones would rise to receive the warm welcome of the House. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could, what's the word? If I could, if I could go off on a tangent for a second, Mr. Chairman, I remember sitting in a legislature when I was in school, and I know that my reaction each time I went there is, what are they talking about? And why? I had a number of questions. I think the students who come to this House have the same kind of reaction I had when I was their age, which is that I didn't particularly understand.
Order, please. Order, please. This is the third time I've had to ask individual members if they would tone it down. Maybe if they would seriously consider some vocal hibernation or leave the chamber and allow the member to speak. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first thing that I couldn't understand when I came to the legislature as a student was what they were talking about. The second thing I couldn't understand was why was nobody paying attention, which is something that's in evidence today. Why is it? Now, when I was a new member in this House, and I stood up to, well, it's not the reason the Minister for Justice is suggesting. That's not the reason. But the first time that I stood up in this House as a new member, I realized suddenly, with a shock, that absolutely nobody in the room was paying the slightest attention to what I was saying.
Oh, you're just playing to the audience, Graham.
Mr. Speaker?
On. You're just playing to the audience.
And it's the only sphere of life. It's the only sphere of life. See, one of the other things that I wondered about was why were the other members sitting there and not just sitting listening, but actually actively interfering with what the person was saying, which is called
Order,
heckling.
please. Order, please. The member for Glace Bay.
You know, the member from Halifax Fairview knows full well that he plays that game as well. And in here, we don't call it fooling around, we call it democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It may be a good point, but it's a difference of two opinions between two members and not a point of order. However, I would remind the honourable member for Halifax Fairview, we are speaking on Bill 62 and not the rules of the House of Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I was just getting around to that again. So what we're talking about is the government's budget. The government's budget, how much we pay for schools, roads, hospitals, all the things that the government pay for. And I was talking, before the introduction, I was talking about the fact that this is a matter of confidence in the government. If this bill is defeated, the government falls, and tomorrow is the first day of an election campaign. I got my times ready. Mr. Speaker. Now, the Liberal Party knows that they don't want an election. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party knows that there is nobody in Nova Scotia, really, or hardly anybody, who wants a provincial election. And in fact, their members, one of the members sitting not just a few doors down from me here, Mr. Speaker, said in the Cape Breton Post that he was awfully glad there's not going to be an election, and yet he voted against the budget. So how is it that the Liberal Party can reconcile the fact that they will all say they don't want an election, and in the same breath say that they would defeat a piece of legislation that would actually bring down the government? How can they reconcile those two irreconcilable thoughts? There is only one member of that caucus who had the courage to actually be consistent, Mr. Speaker, and to recognize that his constituents didn't want an election, that they didn't want the government to fall on this budget, Mr. Speaker, and that member should be congratulated for doing that. Now, Mr. Speaker, that member represents the riding of Cape Breton West, which is right next door to a number of other ridings also held by the Liberal Party. And that member said that he was doing so because that's what his constituents wanted. How can it be that in that riding, the constituents want this budget to be supported, and right next door, they don't? Somebody, Mr. Speaker, somebody is not in touch with their constituents.
Does everybody in Nova Scotia think alike?
Somebody is not in touch with their constituents.
have to think
Because
the same?
the other thing that member said, the one who's just sitting a few doors down from me, is that not only was he glad there was no election, but he was glad that seniors were getting money to pay for their health care costs in long-term care facilities. Mr. Speaker, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I won't apologize for it to that member or anybody else. The government should be congratulated for finally solving the problem that should have been solved long ago. They deserve to be congratulated for that, Mr. Speaker. But somehow, the members of the Liberal Party can say that they were lobbying for this change. They were a little late, but still they said they were for it. Mr. Speaker, they said they're for it. They said they're glad that it happened, but they're still voting against it. So, Mr. Speaker, in the next election, which could be a year from now, could be 2 years from now, who knows? Who really knows for sure, Mr. Speaker? When my Liberal opponent talks, as I'm sure he or she will, about all they're doing for seniors, I'm going to remind them that when it came time to make a very concrete and important change in the lives of Nova Scotia seniors and their families, that party voted against it, Mr. Speaker. That party voted against it,
You voted for 500
Mr. Speaker,
user fees.
and
5
I
and 8
am
user
going to
fees.
make sure
You voted for that.
that the people in my constituency
508 user
know
fees.
that, Mr. Speaker.
Make sure
I'm
they
going to
know
make
you
sure
did
they
too.
know that.
We'll make make sure they know what
So,
you stand for.
Mr. Speaker, I hope I'm not diverging too much from the topic when I say that objective observers of this House have said that they have never seen a caucus as chaotic and disorganized as the Liberal caucus has been in this session, Mr. Speaker. And I don't say that with any sense of gladness, because I'm one of those strange people who believe that the people of Nova Scotia are best served when they have good, strong, principled parties taking positions that they believe on principle are good for the people of Nova Scotia, and that they are competing to win the favor of Nova Scotia voters by having a policy package that best serves the people. And I'm sorry to see the Liberal Party so directionless, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that after their leadership contest in the fall, that they will find their bearings again and once again bring to this House some sense of organization and discipline and consistency, something that has been rather lacking, I think, from their performance, Mr. Speaker, in this sitting of the House. So, Mr. Speaker, I was talking about how this is a matter of confidence in the government, and how I said that nevertheless there are some things that we should not assume should go through. And I do want to say, while we're talking on title, that there were several things in this bill that didn't belong in this bill and had to go. And I'm pleased to see that between my speech on second reading and now, that in fact has happened. So that the Financial Measures Act is more truly what it was meant to be, which is a statutory implementation of the government's fiscal plan. It's still not entirely that, Mr. Speaker, but I do want to take a moment while we're talking on title to talk about a couple of the important changes that have happened over the past couple of weeks. First of all was this matter of grow-in benefits for pensions, the former Part 12. This was a benefit that was available to older workers working in industries that were wound up, and so the pension plan was wound up. And a classic example of that, Mr. Chairman, was the winding up of the Ultramar refinery. That the workers from the Ultramar refinery over in the Dartmouth side took advantage, got the benefit of those grow-in benefits, and here in the Financial Measures Act we saw the government was going to take it out. Now, not only was that not mentioned anywhere in the budget, but it has nothing to do with the government's fiscal and economic plan. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because the government's own plans are not subject to the Pension Benefits Act. So this didn't affect the government one little bit. And nevertheless, they were proposing to take it out in the Financial Measures Act. So, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to see that when we pressed the issue, the government recognized that it didn't belong there and took it out. And so we still have that extra protection, that layer of insurance, if you will, for older workers in industries where there's even a possibility of them being wound up. Now, as I said in the Law Amendments Committee, Mr. Chairman, this is not a matter of putting this issue to rest once and for all. This is more an issue of deferring it so it can get the proper study that it needs. Because there's no question that there's a number of pension plans where there's no realistic possibility of them being wound up, like municipalities and I suppose universities and colleges as well. And so it's hard to see why the extra cost should be imposed on those pension plans when there's no realistic chance that they'll ever be used. It does add to the cost. It does add to the burden on those institutions' bottom line. So I look forward to this issue coming back. We're willing to take a serious look at it, Mr. Speaker, but the Department of Finance has got to do more work, especially with the opposition, in showing why it needs to be done and maybe to refine it a little bit. The other piece, Mr. Speaker, that has changed just in the last matter of days, and I'm very pleased to see this, Mr. Speaker, is the former Part 17, which because of the changes to the grown benefits is now Part 16, and that has to do with public service superannuation. Now again, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe, I've never accepted that this was part of the government's budget. It was announced by the government well in advance of this budget. The minister, in defending his decision to raise contribution rates by 1 percentage point across the board for the public service pension, said that he was obliged to do it as part of his fiduciary duty as the sole trustee. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance can't have it both ways. He can't say on the one hand that he's doing something as a fiduciary, and on the other hand say that it's a matter of essential government taxation and fiscal policy. It's got to be one or the other. It can't be both at the same time. So I've never believed, and our caucus has never accepted, that this belonged in the Financial Measures Act. It should have been as a standalone bill. Sure, it's got money implications, but almost every bill the government brings forward has money implications. That doesn't make it a matter of confidence in the government. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, that's really the theme of what I'm talking about today, about what is and what is not a matter of confidence in the government when we're dealing with a bill like the Financial Measures Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that there were a number of meetings in which the minister participated and the member for Halifax Clayton Park participated, and I participated to try and improve what the government was proposing to do here. Because there should be no question there's a problem here with the government's consultation with the public sector unions, principally the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE, and the Nova Scotia Government General Employees Union, or NSGEU. Mr. Speaker, represent about 80% of contributors. Now, there is another group out there that I think the government hasn't paid enough attention to, surprisingly hasn't paid enough attention to. They always seem to get left out. And I'm talking, of course, about the actual pensioners, the people who are receiving their pension. Because we should never forget that those unions don't actually represent their retired members. And in some scenarios, the interests of the contributing members and the interests of the retired members conflict. Now, there is an organization with voluntary membership called the Nova Scotia Government Retired Employees Association, the NSGREA. The current president is Mr. Bernie LaRussick from Cape Breton Island, I think, who's probably well known to members of this House, certainly well known to anybody who's been involved in workers' compensation issues across the province. And Mr. LaRussick has been involved in a number of other issues over the course of quite an illustrious career. In any event, the NSGREA is not, in my opinion, given its due, is frequently excluded from the table, frequently not included in discussions about pension matters. Now, even though this particular provision that we're talking about here, the 1% across the board increase, doesn't directly affect the pensioners, of course they're affected by any change to the pension plan. They're affected because they're the ones currently drawing from it. And they ought to be included in the discussions. I understand that the Department of Finance committed to briefing them on the recent discussions, and I thank the Minister for that. I myself, speaking for myself, would like to see them being given a more formal role than they have been given up to now. They have a voice, and their voice has to be heard. The thrust of the discussions, Mr. Chairman, was that the unions were not pleased with the way this had been imposed. They were not pleased that this 1% across-the-board increase was announced to them about an hour before the minister announced it publicly. They were not pleased that the matter had not been taken to what's called the Pension Forum, which is the table where all the stakeholders talk about the issues. They were not pleased, especially when this is at least the fourth year when there has been a current service deficit and the actuaries have been calling for an increase in contribution rates, but the minister does it now and says, well, it's a matter of confidence in the government to disagree. By putting it in the Financial Measures Act, that's the message that he's giving. They were not pleased not to be consulted about any of this. They were not pleased that the minister could have done it last year or the year before that and chose not to. They were not pleased that the minister himself will acknowledge that this is only a partial step. This doesn't solve the deficit problem in the Public Service Superannuation Fund. So even though it's a late step and a partial step, the minister still said or implied that it's a matter of confidence in the government. This provision never belonged in the Financial Measures Act, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to see, although I haven't seen the final details, I'm pleased to see that the unions and the Department of Finance, the Minister of Finance, have agreed on certain commitments about the move towards what's called joint trusteeship, where the contributors are given a formal leadership, a formal management role in the management of the fund, and various ancillary things around that, Mr. Speaker. So this is a big win for the unions, and the unions are saying that it's a big win, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Now, I'm not quite sure where the Liberals stand on this, Mr. Speaker. Like on most issues, they got the fence post right up the middle, Mr. Speaker, as usual, trying to play both sides of the issue. On any given controversial issue, you can find the Liberals saying they're both for it and against it, depending on who they talk to. Mr. Chairman, I have personally seen how a Liberal knocking on doors in my riding can say one thing at one door and walk next door, and because that person was on a different side of the issue, the Liberal says exactly the opposite. The Liberals will tell you, as a voter, they'll tell you whatever it is they think you want to hear, Mr. Speaker, and they manage very well to be on both sides of every issue. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party did have its glory days, Mr. Speaker, but those days are behind them. And I don't say that gladly. They have some good new members, Mr. Speaker, who with a bit of work, I think could really form the nucleus of a strong future Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker. But they do have to be careful of being led astray, I think, Mr. Speaker, by some of their senior members who've learned some pretty bad habits over long political careers, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm only just getting going. But I think I'll probably, Mr. Speaker, I'm only just getting going, and I'm sure that I could speak for the full 20 hours on title if only the House asked me to, Mr. Speaker. But if the House wanted me to, I'm sure I could, Mr. Speaker. I could talk for 20 hours about... Well, no, never mind. I've said enough about the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker. I think I'll save the rest of my remarks for third reading. Thank you for your attention, Mr. Chairman. Before I close, let me just say to you, once again, congratulations on your vote. And if only you had more influence on the rest of your caucus, we'd all be much better off today.
Before I recognize the next speaker, I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy for an introduction.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the East Gallery this afternoon, I'm very pleased to have two of my constituents join us, but they have a special connection to this House of Assembly today, and that is their granddaughter is a page here, Denise McPherson, standing over the side. But I do want to recognize and ask for both ladies to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House, Claire McPherson and Frances McNeil, her grandmothers.
Okay, shall the clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. Bill number 62, an act respecting certain financial measures. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, would you please call Bill number 74, the Oil Refineries and LNG Plants Municipal Taxation Act?
Yes. Bill number 74, an act respecting the municipal taxation of oil refineries and liquefied natural gas plants. Any interveners? Shall the clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that your committee do now rise and report these bills.
Where do you want me to sign? Right here?
Chairman of the Committee and the whole House on Bills reports.
The committee has met and considered 3 bills, namely 58, 62, and 74. The chairman's been instructed to recommend them to favorable consideration of the House, each without amendment.
Or these bills be read a third time at a future date. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the consent of the House to move those bills onto the order paper for third reading later this afternoon.
Is it agreed? Agreed. Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for third reading?
Public bills for third reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 26, the Health Protection Act?
Bill number 26, third reading, the Health Protection Act. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this bill be now read the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to express my appreciation to all members of the House for the attention that they have paid to this bill and for their considered amendments. I also, again, want to express my appreciation, and I'm sure the appreciation of the entire membership of the House, to the staff of the Department of Health who have worked on this bill, and also to the staffs of the various caucuses who worked with them in the bringing forward the amendments that were considered and accepted by the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to speak for a couple of minutes on the record on third reading because this is a bill that passed second reading in the fall session of 2003, went to law amendments over the winter. We had a hearing with submissions, representations made before the House returned. There were concerns about this legislation, and I think it's important to put on the record that this government took an opportunity once they heard from the Nurses Union of Nova Scotia, heard from the NSGEU, heard from the HIV/AIDS advocacy group. I don't remember the specific name of it, but and I think there were other written submissions, Mr. Speaker. Based on that, there were concerns that our caucus had. We were worried about the balance in this legislation between individual rights and the sort of community rights whenever you have a particular public health hazard. Could be SARS, could be tuberculosis. And there were some concerns in this legislation that we particularly wanted addressed. There were 7 amendments, law amendments that were passed of ours, Mr. Speaker. We're glad to see those. Most of them reflected the need to balance between individual rights and the rights of a community to protect themselves in a public health hazard. One of the ones particular that was of note that we thought was important to change was that originally the hearing that was put forward for someone who was refusing to comply with an order was to be private unless it was asked to be public. And that goes against pretty well every constitutional and rule of law consideration and natural justice consideration in this country. Probably a violation of the Charter. We were glad to see that changed. The onus reversed so that it's a public hearing unless someone specifically asks for a private hearing. I think that's much more in conformity with our normal natural justice processes in this province and in this country. We also tried to ensure that there is some planning going on between public health, between the chief medical officer of this province, and emergency measures, because in this day and age, we're as likely to have an state of emergency in this province as a result of a medical emergency as we are of a physical or a natural disaster. Natural disaster, Mr. Speaker, and we're glad to see that that coordination will be done over the years, and based on that, we're prepared to support this legislation now.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just rise for a few minutes to just say a few words on Bill number 26. And Bill number 26 is an important piece of legislation, and it's a bit of a preventative type of legislation to prepare the province in the case that we do have a serious health issue that does strike our province. God willing, that won't be the case, but it's best that we be prepared and we learn from the experiences of other jurisdictions that unfortunately were caught a bit off guard by unfortunate events. As Speaker, I want to take this opportunity certainly to commend my colleague from Glace Bay, our health critic, who worked closely along with our staff, with the Minister of Health staff, on addressing some of the concerns with this bill. I think the amendments brought forward by the Liberal caucus, I think as recognized by the Minister of Health, were good amendments. One, I remember, was dealing with a communication strategy, so it's clear how any public emergencies would be communicated to all Nova Scotians. There was an issue about an annual report being provided, and also I believe the other one was to provide a report following any sort of public health outbreak here in this province. So I think this bill is an example of where all three opposition parties have played a role in making the bill stronger. I think this is one that shows to Nova Scotians that minority government is working well, and I think it's an opportunity also when one looks at some of the people involved behind the scenes. I'm not aware of all the individuals in the Minister of Health's office that may have been involved with this, but I can certainly tell you that Duff Montgomery has been an individual that I believe has been certainly a stellar person for the opposition to work with, whether it be on legislation, whether it be on issues. I think Duff has done a good job, and I think it's not often enough that we recognize some of the people behind the scenes that do some good work for this province that aren't on the front lines. But if I were to point out of some of the political operatives that the government does have on their side, I would say that Duff Montgomery would be certainly one of the better ones that has certainly worked well with us. And I think at the end of the day, you know it's the last day of the session, but no, in all seriousness, even when he was with the Minister of Education, when he was in health, certainly he was very helpful to members on this side of the House, and that's certainly appreciated. So I want to thank the Minister, because our amendments did come in for Committee of the Whole. They're usually done at law amendment, but the Minister certainly did allow them to go forward at Committee of the Whole, and I think at the end of the day it has made Bill number 26 a stronger bill, and one that hopefully addresses the concerns of Nova Scotians in the event of a public issue, a public health crisis here in this province. So with that, I'm pleased to see the bill move forward to third reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Health to close debate on Bill number 26. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to close the debate. I thank the members opposite for their comments, and I can say the other day when I was introducing staff, I looked up and saw that Duff had left the gallery, and he left because he didn't want me singling him out. I thank the honourable member for Richmond for doing that. He is certainly a very helpful individual and was in this particular process. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to conclude the debate. This is probably the most significant piece of legislation that I have had the responsibility of dealing with since I've been a Minister of the Crown, and I'm glad to see it proceeding to the final stage today.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 26. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
26, entitled an act to provide for the protection of health.
Or the bill to pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, will you please call Bill number 40, the Assessment Act.
Bill number 40, the Assessment Act. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I move this bill be now read for the third time.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I very much the same. I welcome the opportunity to speak to this legislation. It's central. It affects absolutely everybody in this who is a property owner in this province. And as I've said over and over again, every square inch of the province is in fact included within a municipality and therefore subject to property assessment. There was simply no time to delay. And I'm very pleased that through the motions that have been moved through the Law Amendments Committee, we have in essence developed what in some circumstances might even be described as a pilot project of 3 years of capping property assessments for those who may be placed under severe hardship by rapidly escalating property values in their neighbourhood. With this 3-year sunset clause, there's provision for a review of the action of the legislation after 2 years. And the other very important amendment which has been added is that there is in fact provision for an annual percentage to be prescribed before the end of the year. So with those amendments, I'm very pleased to see that this bill is brought forward. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak on Bill 40, and to point out the serious problems connected with Bill 40. It's poorly thought out, Mr. Speaker. Everyone can agree that something needs to be done to help property owners of modest incomes with rising assessments and rising property taxes. But the assessments and the property taxes have doubled and tripled in some cases, Mr. Speaker. In some cases, we have people who are in jeopardy of losing their homes. And it's come to my attention from the phone calls that I've received, it's not just the low-income people, Mr. Speaker, but some people with modest and relatively high income. One gentleman in Chester told me that his taxes were $500 a year only 4 years ago. They've gone to the point where he was paying $600 a month in taxes. Next year, he anticipates they will go to $800 a month. He could afford the $600, but he definitely can't afford the $800. So it's not only affecting low-income earners, Mr. Speaker, it's affecting high-income earners also. Municipalities already have the tools to address the situation. We tried 3-4 years ago, Lunenburg, Chester, and Victoria, to resolve this with the province, and with no results. And now the province is coming in, and what they're doing with Bill 40, Mr. Speaker, is overkill. And and I'll cite some of the reasons why. It creates a tax break for the rich where it's not needed. Municipalities will lose income. The cost to administrate the assessment program will go higher. And there's no guarantee property owners will pay less tax because the revenue is still needed and taxes have to be increased to continue municipal services, Mr. Speaker. I'll quote HRM CEO George McClellan when he said it's like trying to shoot a squirrel with an elephant gun. And the one-size approach does not fit all, Mr. Speaker, in any and all cases. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there's no guarantees a person on a low-income level unable to pay their...
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's no guarantees that a person on low-income levels unable to pay their rising taxes will not lose their house. No Nova Scotian should be forced from their home due to high assessment increases and high taxes that result. Bill 40 does nothing to prevent this, Mr. Speaker. The NDP amendment, Mr. Speaker, I shouldn't be derogatory, I suppose, but somebody who read it said to me they either found that amendment in a box of cornflakes or in a bag of potato chips. Mr. Speaker, the UNSM interpretation of that amendment says that the only thing that is of any positive value in it is the fact that in 2007 it does say that they should have a review, but a review just means somebody could look at it and say, yes, we reviewed it, it's good. So, Mr. Speaker, that's no guarantee, and the cap coming along in the fall, who knows what it is. Mr. Speaker, the issue is better dealt with at the municipal level. Solutions can be tailored that balance the interests of the municipality along with the property owner, individual people caring for individuals. Section 69 and 70 of the Municipal Government Act already allow municipalities the power to do some things, but, Mr. Speaker, they have to create flexibility for the municipality to help all taxpayers, not just one group. And, Mr. Speaker, Bill 40, rich families can pass the tax down to their children, and there's no means test. And a means test would help out these people of the lower income bracket as well as the medium and high. If you have somebody with a good, reasonable high income, and yet here's the taxes at $800 a month, that's almost atrocious to expect anybody to be able to afford that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the parties against the bill: Halifax Regional Municipality, Cape Breton Regional Municipality, the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, Mayor John Prowl, Chair of the Town Caucus, and also the Mayor, and he's the Mayor of Berwick, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Speaker, Robert Rye, Deputy Mayor of the Town of Wolfville, the Municipality of Kings. Here's a lovely one. I have the letter here, Mr. Speaker. John Leaf, Mayor of Queens, former Tory Cabinet Minister, totally against the bill, Mr. Speaker. East Hants, Bill 40 is not the appropriate mechanism to fix these problems. Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Leanne Hassey. We need a property tax policy for the province, not an assessment problem. Matt Dunford provided some alternatives. He came from Lunenburg. And I think it was too little too late, Mr. Speaker. He did offer some solutions, but I think he should take his solutions and suggestions to the municipalities. And, Mr. Speaker, I have to speak on behalf of Trudy Payne, who came to the committee from Chester, to plead on behalf of her elderly mom because of the extreme taxes were too high. And still, Mr. Speaker, this act will not address the problem as created. And Mr. Speaker, what I would like to do is just give a few final notes that this is nothing but a purely political bill. The government has its eye on the prize, Mr. Speaker, not on the people. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, Charles Crosby, who is the incoming UNSM president and presently the mayor of town of Yarmouth, said to me just this morning that the province has absolutely no business meddling in the affairs of the municipalities. My friend, the MLA from Digby Annapolis, who I respect immensely, Mr. Speaker, told me just in a conversation recently that he kind of likes everybody in this House, but he really feels sorry for the poor Tories on the other side. And I said, why? He said, because they have no common sense. To suggest a bill of 48-hour notice on gas tax, how could they ever expect to resolve the assessment issue, Mr. Speaker? And I equate the fact that to me, it's like finding a gallon of vinegar out in the middle of the desert. And you grab it and you drink it to quench your thirst. Now, it's either kill or cure. And Bill 40, Mr. Speaker, is the kill and absolutely not the cure. George McClellan, again from HRM, the CEO. Why don't we go back to hiring or having municipal administrators visit the municipalities? Mr. Speaker, they did that when I was a councillor, and they did it when I was warden, and it was very effective, but that has come to an end. Jerry Ryan, the CAO of CBRM, in his letter to me stated, Mr. Speaker, that CBRM and HRM have cooperated and they have addressed the issue, and they have a solution that they would like to bring forward to all municipalities for their approval. So there's cooperation on the municipal level. And any government, Mr. Speaker, who would assess a $140 million power plant like Wreck Cove at $645,000, when I look at the figures, Mr. Speaker, guess what? They're only $100,034,000 out. So they don't hold any credibility in my books. Mr. Speaker, finally, this government has failed because they can't blame the assessment on the federal government, which they've blamed everything else on. They haven't done anything on the provincial level. So what they're doing, they're interfering on the municipal level to try to make some political brownie points before this House closes. And Mr. Speaker, on behalf of this party and the municipalities, I say hands off, let the municipalities handle their own business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, finally, something. It's not perfect, but finally something. So I'd like to give my compliments, first of all, to the member for Halifax Atlantic. As a rookie MLA involved with municipal affairs, she's taken the leadership. She's brought forward these amendments. She took them through the law amendments procedure, and they were accepted because of some of the good ideas that were forthcoming. So for a rookie member in a minority government to get these amendments approved, I would like to pay my compliments to the member from Halifax Atlantic. More importantly, though, I want to pay my compliments to Eric Creaser. Now, do members opposite and the members of the third party remember that name, Eric Creaser? Remember Eric Creaser when we brought that issue to this House? Eric Creaser, that gentleman who lives down in the South Shore, whose assessment went from $82,000 to $380,000 overnight. I wonder if any members of the third party remember Eric Creaser. I wonder if any of them got a call from Eric Creaser. When you hear from Eric Creaser and his first reaction to you when he calls you is, young fella, something's got to be done about this. And you know, when he called me young fella, right from the start is, I like this man. He's making a lot of sense. But having had the opportunity to go down and see that glorious piece of property and to see how Mr. Creaser wanted to pass it on, and now will have the opportunity to pass it on to his children, that inheritance clause, that alone makes this legislation worthy of my support. But more importantly, I would like to bring to your attention, it must have been Halloween that night, And perhaps the member from Victoria the Lakes had a mask on because he said this to the media. He said this to the media. Tories introduced bill to cap assessments. And the member from Victoria the Lakes said, and I may quote, and I'm going to table this, Liberal municipal affairs critic Gerald Sampson, a former warden of Victoria County, one of the real estate hotspots, called the legislation, quote, an excellent first step. An excellent first step. An excellent first step. Now, here we have it. An excellent first step, and when we look back on this legislation and all the time that we've taken and who we have been listening to, I want the members of the third party to know that I don't necessarily listen to the UNSM. I don't necessarily listen to the HRM or the CBRM. Who I listen to are the people on the government wharf, the people on the shoreline, the constituents of Timberley Prospect. That's who I listen to. I listen to the people who have been affected by this issue. I listen to the people in the coastal communities that I represent, the Sloan Whites, the Morashes, the Manuels, who have brought this case up in the doorstep. They brought it up when I first ran in the 80s. They brought it up in 93. And when I got elected in 98, they finally said somebody is going to the legislature to speak about these ridiculous assessments on coastal properties. Now, let me tell you, I've heard the member from Halifax Clayton Park in Law Amendment say, quote, this is just a local matter. Just a local matter. Well, you take the tour from the Shad Bay Bridge through the South Shore, through Lunenburg, to the Yarmouth County line. That is not just a local matter. That is a provincial matter that needs a provincial solution. A provincial solution. This is a doorstep. This is a government wharf issue. This is an issue that matters deeply to Nova Scotians. It matters because we want the opportunity to pass this land on to our children, and we want to have the opportunity to keep these coastal communities alive and well. We want them to be able to say to their children and grandchildren, this is Canada's ocean playground, and you can afford to pass it on to your children. That's what this legislation says. Now, it's not perfect. Matt Dunford, who I have met with on many occasions, Matt Durnford, thank you. Matt has passed on the fact that he will give the legislation a passing grade. And I will give the legislation a passing grade also, because there is some leadership involved here. But in return, we are supposed to turn to the municipalities. The municipalities will take care of this issue. My question for the members of the third party, have the municipalities done anything with this issue in the last number of years, in the last decade? The answer is no, they haven't done it. So if you would like to talk to a man in the know, when Lawrence Mawhinney calls my constituency office, when the mayor of that town, Lawrence Mawhinney, calls me and he wants to meet and talk about the issue of assessments on the South Shore, I will listen to Lawrence Mawhinney. He knows the case. He has been in municipal affairs. He has been the mayor of Lunenburg for many long years. He knows the issue. That's the issue that we faced. We have gone halfway with the solution. Now, to throw the baby out with the bathwater is not how we work in minority government. I will tell you, Mr. Minister, that I'm proud that you've brought this legislation forward. And I can tell you it wasn't just yesterday when I stood in this house and that crowd, unfortunately, were over there. And they were sitting over there that first time I stood in this place, and I nervously asked my first question, and that question was on coastal assessments and access to coast for Nova Scotians. And the answer that I received was a dismissive reply. Why are you so concerned about this issue? It's not a big deal. It's not a big issue at all. And that minister, who's no longer in this house, was accepting advice from members on the front bench with him as they were telling him, oh, don't worry about it. That's not an issue that affects Nova Scotians. Well, let me tell you, I have had the opportunity to meet with Liberals who live in my constituency, Liberals who live in the member from Chester St. Margaret's constituency, and they have said under no circumstances will they vote for any Liberal candidate unless this issue is voted for, that Bill 40 is passed through this House. Now, if members of the third party are saying, oh, one of Esterbrook's pieces of fiction, I would like to point out the other day there was a candidate here from the riding of Chester St. Margaret's who's representing the Liberal Party. And I can tell you the conversations that I had with him, he's concerned. He knows, that man knows the issues. That man has lived in the community that he is intending to represent for many long times. He's a school teacher, he's an athletic coach, and does he stand a chance to get any votes when this Liberal caucus is going to vote against this piece of assessment legislation? He doesn't stand a chance, and guess what? He has the courage to tell us that, at least. He has the courage to tell us. So you get yourself a candidate nominated in Timberley Prospect. You get yourself a candidate nominated in Timberley Prospect. You come to Terrence Bay, you come to Dover, and we'll talk about the assessment problem. And when the answer comes out that the Liberals did nothing about this issue, let me see how many votes you get in the coastal communities. I look forward to this piece of legislation going forward. It has my support, and it has the support of this caucus. Thank you.
The honourable member. Order, please. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you very much,
The honourable
Mr.
member for
Speaker.
Preston has the floor.
I'm not going to stand here and scream and holler and assume that everything is wonderful with this bill. I can guarantee you I'm not going to do that because everything isn't wonderful with this bill. This bill is going to be remembered by the taxpayers of this municipality and every municipality in this province. And I can tell you as a regional councillor, past regional councillor, I know what I'm talking about. Taxes are raised in two ways: assessments and tax rates. So what's going to happen, what is going to happen is that taxes in this municipality and every municipality in this province are going to go up, without this bill or with this bill. This bill does nothing to address the problem that's being seen by people that have outrageous growth in their assessments. It's not going to tackle that problem. What's going to happen to all the members in this House that voted for this bill when their next door neighbor comes to you that's just bought a new home that's identical to the home you live in, and guess what? They're going to pay more property taxes. They're going to be extremely upset. And that is going to happen. That's going to happen very shortly. I'm not going to waste the time of the House here today because it appears there's another deal been made with the government and the NDP to support this bill to the detriment of the people in Nova Scotia. And the people in Nova Scotia want to remember this day on this bill. We have to remember from Timberley Prospect screaming and hollering how great a deal this is. And I will remember this, and so will the taxpayers in this province, when people in his community, when the gentleman he quoted is paying $600 a month, when in 2 years' time, he's still paying a huge tax bill because the municipality has had to raise the tax rate to make up for the revenue that the assessment didn't do. The bill had to be changed. It wasn't changed properly, and it's not going to do the things it has to do to protect the taxpayers in this municipality or anywhere in Nova Scotia. We have to have the courage to call a spade and make sure that the people of this province know what's going on. I'm ashamed of this bill. I'm disappointed in the government. I'm disappointed in the NDP for supporting it. And the long-term effects on this are going to be very negative for the municipality, all the municipalities in this province. And if anyone thinks any different, they haven't done their homework. Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hadn't contemplated on speaking on this particular piece of legislation until I was inspired by the member for Halifax Timberley Prospect. Mr. Speaker, I have never seen such a void of logic in all my years in this legislature. Never, ever have I seen such a void of logic when it comes to this particular piece of legislation. That honourable member, as well as all members that vote for this particular piece of legislation, know full well that this issue could have been satisfied very easily at the municipal level by adjusting the tax rate and not interfering with the assessment process, which was delegated under the Municipal Government Act to all municipalities in this province. And since, Mr. Speaker, this legislature has convened, we have seen continuous piecemeal legislation put forth for political purposes. This bill is nothing more than the Michael Baker bill. This is what the people of Nova Scotia are calling it, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton West knows full well he's to refer members in the House either by their portfolio or their constituency, not their names. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Well, this is true. This is true, Mr. Speaker. Now, I'm not sure how many Michael Bakers there are in the province of Nova Scotia, but there's one that I know of. However, I know there's also a Michael Baker who's Minister of Justice, so I'll refer to him as the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, there are 3 hotspots in the province with regards to this particular issue: Lunenburg, Queens, and Victoria. Well, Enfield, there were some sporadic situations there. But, Mr. Speaker, we saw the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities come before law amendments. They spoke universally opposed to it. The individual municipalities that, for whatever reason, I do believe, I cannot prove it, but I do believe were encouraged by representatives within the government to come before law amendments and make this representation. Mr. Speaker, all you have to do is look at the contents of the representation. Not once did they go back to the issue of tax rate and how that could have been adjusted, as what's being done in Halifax Regional Municipality, where they have 3 tax rates: urban, suburban, and rural. And Mr. Speaker, much the same as what's taken place in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality: urban, suburban, and rural. And yes, Mr. Speaker, under the Municipal Government Act, there's also provision for the individual municipalities to provide exemptions, to provide special provisions. Why hasn't the government opted to take that route? Why? Because it's not politically popular for the Minister of Justice to do nothing. And yes, the member for Halifax, or for Timberley Prospect, had some real genuine issues that had to be addressed on some of the anomalies that were happening in the marketplace. But to go in and start carving up on a piecemeal basis the very principle for which the assessment process of this province is based is very dangerous. It's very dangerous to start carving up at the fair market value process. And the Minister for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations knows this. He knows this from being a municipal councillor. He knows this as a provincial politician. He knows what's happening. We're seeing it with the other piece of legislation, Bill number 74, that was just given further approbation. Mr. Speaker, again, a further imposition on the roles and the responsibilities of the municipalities that were laid out cooperatively between the province of Nova Scotia and the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. Why, Mr. Speaker, have none of the other Tory backbenchers spoken on this issue? Why? Why have they not received representation from their individual constituencies? Why? Because, Mr. Speaker, they are opposed to the bill. They are opposed to the bill because their municipal politicians are telling them so. Now, if the municipal politicians, as they all like to say they are, at the grassroots level and are plugged in at the front lines, why aren't they listening to them? Why are they ignoring the advice
of all these people in Nova Scotia just to satisfy a political quest. Something that was put before this legislature in the last session. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned. Yes, there will be some issues that will be addressed in this particular piece of legislation. There are some good things in it. But as a whole, Mr. Speaker, there is more inequity than equity. And I would submit, Mr. Speaker, as my colleague from Preston has indicated, this will come back to haunt every politician that supports this legislation. It will come back to haunt the relationship between the provincial government, irregardless of what political stripe, and the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. Mr. Speaker, it just behooves me as to what the logic is. And the amount of input that has come from the Tory benches, whether it be from Pictou County or Colchester County or Halifax Regional Municipality, or where have you, Mr. Speaker, where's it at? I have never seen such a void in representation on such complex and important issues that affect the lives of so many people. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there are seniors in this province that need help. They need tax relief. Are they getting it? They're not getting it from this government, Mr. Speaker. All you have to do is look at the way they were treated when they were looking for the property tax relief because they were receiving the old age security and the supplemental benefits. And the way that they were treated. And the Minister of Finance now, when he was Minister of Community Services, knows full well I made representation to his office the way that people were treated. When they'd call for an application for that tax relief, did they get it? Not a bit. What they were getting is put you through the ringer and say, okay, well, we'll tell you on the phone whether you'll qualify or not. We're not going to send you an application, even though you're legally entitled to it. We'll determine whether you should get an application. Talk about, you know, the things being off the rails. And then we'll see what's happening here today. Yes, it'll be great for the Minister of Justice. Yes, it may be great for the Minister of Environment and Labour. And yes, it may satisfy the concerns for the member for Timberlea Prospect and one or two other members. But the big picture, Mr. Speaker, has been lost. I have never, and in closing, Mr. Speaker, I have to say this, I have never seen such fragmented approach to public policy as I've witnessed in this session. Well, Mr. Speaker, the voice of altruism is coming back. Well, I'm not as bright as the member for Halifax Fairview. I never pretend to be. I never pretend to have all the answers like the member for Halifax Fairview. Mr. Speaker, I only wish I could be as good as the member for Halifax Fairview on this issue or any other issue. But please, this is what the people of Cape Breton West sent. So this is the representation I shall make. And if the member for Halifax Fairview got a better solution, let him provide it. Mea culpa, mea culpa. But Mr. Speaker, on a serious note, I would serve notice to the minister and the government as what's happening here. The eloquence and the passion that was put forth by the member for Timberlea Prospect is only surpassed by the lack of logic that was put into this issue in trying to resolve some very serious and complex issues. Well, sometimes not having anything is better than nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I will close my remarks. We are on record as to where we stand on this, and I do believe the Premier, if anyone who should know about it, with the issues of municipal government in his constituency, if anyone should be taking the bull by the horns and addressing with it, it should be that member there, Mr. Speaker. But that won't come. That won't come. There'll be a walk in the snow before that'll come. I can be assured of that. Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations, to close debate on Bill number 40. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Mr. Speaker, in closing debate, I just want to add a few remarks. First of all, I want to say that in no reflection should the hard work and the dedication of the people who work in my department be reflected by the debate here today. Our department assesses over 660,000 properties each and every year. Mr. Speaker, the department's satisfaction rate with respect to the clients they receive has increased year over year over year. 74% of the people who contact our office are satisfied overall with the work that we do. And, Mr. Speaker, I think that speaks highly for the people that do this work. The fact that every municipal unit, every one of the 55 municipal units has a property or many properties that exceed 25% assessment year over year has nothing to do with the work that our assessment staff do. It is to do with hot real estate markets, often that are beyond the control of the neighbors who happen to be put in a precarious position where their tax bills increase rapidly as a result of that market, Mr. Speaker. I want to comment briefly about some of the comments that were made during closing debate. Mr. Speaker, members talked about the fact that there should be or needs to be a means test. And Mr. Speaker, initially we brought this to the attention of the UNSM, who then told us maybe that's not the right approach. When we put it in the piece of legislation, they said, well, maybe that isn't the right approach either. And Mr. Speaker, I felt like I was being pushed and pulled at the same time, and I felt as if maybe there was an attempt to try to delay resolving this issue indefinitely, Mr. Speaker. After all, Mr. Speaker, it's not about necessarily having the support of the UNSM or any of the municipalities. It's about having the support of the people who elect us. That is the taxpayers of Nova Scotia and the people who see this as an important issue. The member for Victoria the Lakes was absolutely correct when he said municipalities have the ability to fix this within the Municipal Government Act. That is true, Mr. Speaker, but they failed to do that. In the absence of their leadership, Mr. Speaker, we had to do something. We had to react, Mr. Speaker. Our reaction is a piece of legislation that enabled a great deal of consultation, Mr. Speaker, consultation in which I took the time to meet with and discuss with every single municipal unit this very issue, Mr. Speaker. I will tell you this, that municipal councillors across this province recognize the need for something to be done, Mr. Speaker. We did something about it. For nearly a decade, Mr. Speaker, for nearly a decade, this has plagued many people around this province, Mr. Speaker. Our government reacted, and I'm very proud of the reaction that we had. Mr. Speaker, I recognize that not in every case we'll be able to meet the needs and expectations of UNSM, but in this case, Mr. Speaker, what we did was we met the needs and the expectations of those Nova Scotians who saw their increase in assessment dramatic. And Mr. Speaker, I am pleased with the results of a bill that will protect those individuals, and a bill that will see that Nova Scotians will be able to stay in their homes where they belong, regardless of if they live on coastal property or where they live in Nova Scotia, in any of the 55 municipal units, Mr. Speaker. I think this is a piece of legislation that reacts to the needs of Nova Scotians, and I think it's a good piece of legislation, and I move closure of third reading, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 40. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour? Court of vote has been called for. Are the whips satisfied now? Whips satisfied? Satisfied? Yes. Your court of vote has been called for on third reading of Bill number 40. The clerks will call the roll. Those in favour will say aye. Those contrary-minded, nay.
Mr. Clark. Aye. Mr. Morse.
Aye.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Russell.
Yes.
Mr. Ham.
Yes.
Mr. Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Muir.
Yes.
Mr. Christie.
Yes.
Mr. Fage.
Yes.
Mr. McIsaac.
Yes.
Ms. Carolyn Bolivar Getson.
Yes.
Mr. D'Entremont.
Yes.
Mr. Hurlbert.
Yes.
Mr. Barnett.
Yes.
Mr. Morash.
Yes.
Mr. Dukes.
Yes.
Mr. DeWolf.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Chisholm.
Yes.
Mr. Langell.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes.
Mr. Chataway.
Yes.
Mr. Perrin.
Aye.
Miss Massey.
Yes.
Mr. McDonnell.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Miss Maureen McDonald. Absent. Mr. Dexter.
Yes.
Mr. Duvall.
Yes.
Mr. Manning McDonald.
No.
Mr. Gadet.
No.
Mr. McKinnon.
No.
Ms. Whalen.
Order, please. Order, please.
Ms. Whalen.
No.
Mr. Caldwell.
No.
Mr. Glavine.
No.
Mr. Sampson.
No.
Mr. H. Dave Wilson.
No.
Mr. Sampson.
No.
Mr. Steele.
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Parker.
Yes.
Ms. Raymond.
Yes.
Mr. Epstein. Absent. Mr. Pye. Mr. Goss.
Yes.
Mr. David Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Estabrooks.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
No.
Mr. Theriault.
No.
Mr. McNeil.
No.
Those in support of the motion, 36. Those opposed, 12.
Motion is carried.
Entitled an act to amend Chapter 23 of the revised statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
The bill to pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honorable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 46, the Public Service Act?
Bill number 46, Public Service Act. The Honorable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Speaker, I move third reading of Bill number 46.
The Honorable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm quite pleased that the Office of Health Promotion is going to provide some resources to young people in the communities that I represent and many of us here today. Also, the amendments that were done to the bill, Mr. Speaker, some of the input by some of the organizations in the province was very important. The Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia, the Canadian Cancer Society were very valuable in their input in this bill, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased that they had their say in that matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has some of the country's poorest health statistics, trends, and inactivity and obesity among young people in our country, Mr. Speaker, and I'm hoping that this Office of Health Promotion and this bill will bring some kind of relief to the kids and many of the youth and get rid of the obesity and help with a healthy, active lifestyle, Mr. Speaker. Without the health promotion strategy to tackle growing demands, Mr. Speaker, on our healthcare system, our healthcare budget will continue to the breaking point, Mr. Speaker. So the money spent now, Mr. Speaker, will be very valuable to us in the future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in a critical stage, Mr. Speaker, in the decision-making process for health and wellness in this province. The current rate of chronic illness, disabilities, and death is just not acceptable. So I'm hoping this office is going to address some of these problems in this province and many of the members here. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I like this bill. It's up to all of us, government, political parties, health organizations, businesses, and community leaders to create and develop health promotion programs, policies, and initiatives that will be necessary to ensure our communities in our province will be able to meet the health and economic challenges of the present and the future, Mr. Speaker. The province will be strongest when we all act together with conviction on health promotion plan that meets this challenge, Mr. Speaker. The amendments recognize and represent the important long-term opportunities and expectations for all that contributed to this plan, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture has closed debate on Bill number 46. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member, I thank him for his comments as well as the other comments made earlier during the process of the bill. I agree with the member that the amendments make the bill stronger, and I'd like to thank the organizations who put forward their recommendations. With that, Mr. Speaker, I again move third reading, I guess.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 46. The House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 46, entitled an act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of Health Promotion.
Order the bill to pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 48, the Education Act?
Bill number 48, the Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and move third reading of Bill number 48, the Education Act.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of the Honourable Member of Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you. I assure the members that I will not mention P3 schools. I will not mention previous Liberal education ministers, because I seem to involve them in the debate when we talk about the importance to school access. In the growing community that I represent, I can tell you this piece of legislation has been well received. I've heard from some seniors groups. The acceptance of the amendment that was suggested is much appreciated by the gardening group on the Prospect Road, by the exercise group in Tantallon. That sort of open-mindedness and the use of schools will allow them to continue to be a focal point in our community. I look forward to this piece of legislation going with the approval of the House. It's a good piece of legislation. It's a common sense piece of legislation. And I look forward to working with this government and perhaps persuading those operators of those notorious P3 schools of being as fair as this piece of legislation is to the kids, the youth, the nonprofit groups, and the seniors of this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I hadn't contemplated on speaking, but I am inspired by the member for Halifax Timberlea or Timberlea Prospect. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of issues with this particular piece of legislation that I thought we should flag. And it's first with regards to the cost of this legislation to the individual school boards. The Halifax Regional School Board appeared before the Human Resources Committee not more than a month ago and indicated that it would cost the Halifax Regional School Board an additional $200,000 out of its existing budget. Now, that's just one school board out of 8 in the province. So the question, obviously, that the minister has to consider when this legislation is approved is what is the sum total amount that it will cost the school boards, and will the province be providing the funding to offset the loss of revenue to the school board that in effect will in some cases come out of the classroom. So there'll be less money for going into the classroom. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that it has been acknowledged by stakeholders from various school boards and the Department of Education that for the minister and his government to achieve what they're attempting to achieve in this legislation doesn't have to come before this House. It can be done either through regulation or policy. And there are certain policy agreements in place, for example, the one with the Halifax Regional School Board. They were asked in the latter part of 2003 to prepare a policy for the community use of schools. Now, whether that was done in anticipation that legislation would be introduced or would not be introduced didn't seem to be an issue when the Halifax Regional School Board officials appeared before the committee, because they were of the opinion that it could be done by policy. Again, being somewhat suspect and in keeping with the member for Timberlea Prospect's comments saying that he wasn't going to talk about P3 schools. Well, the mere fact that he mentioned it, he spoke about it. So we will put that on the table, and we will include it in the equation. As much as they may want to gloss over it, Mr. Speaker, why didn't the NDP introduce an amendment to ensure that P3 schools were included in the process? What an absence by convenience. What an absence by convenience. The whole idea was to get this issue back on the floor of the legislature for political purposes. There was more Machiavellian politics at this one housekeeping item than I've seen in a lot of pieces of legislation in this House. Because, quite simply, the minister, his own staff are saying that this issue could have been addressed by regulation or policy within the board and the boards and the Department of Education. So what was the value of bringing it before this House? Clarification, the honourable member for the Cold Harbour Eastern Passage says. Well, let's go with that. Well, why are those that are going to be using the schools now have to pay this liability insurance? What's the advantage? Are they going to be able to pay the premiums for $1 million liability insurance, personal liability insurance, to access these schools? These volunteer groups, whether it be Boy Scouts or Beavers or Cubs or Girl Guides or seniors or 4-H clubs, are they going to be able to do that? I don't think so. I don't think they will at all. So again, absence by convenience. We seem to be overlooking this. So it's nice, you know, we have all this motherhood and apple pie come before the House to make it look like they're doing a great thing. But they're achieving no more than they could have done at the departmental level. There is one strategic shift, Mr. Speaker, and that is that it empowers the Department of Education to have greater control over the individual schools. The use of facilities, which is not uncommon or not out of sync with what was represented before public accounts here several years ago by the Deputy Minister of Education, and that being that it was the province's wish to take over transportation and facilities from all school boards in the province, and that discussions had taken place with the CEOs of all school boards in the province. This is just another little thin edge of the wedge. So, Mr. Speaker, those points haven't been made. And to remind the member for Timberlea Prospect, who likes to rail on all the time about all the wonderful things that he's doing for his constituents, why hasn't he addressed that particular issue? The issue of insurance, the issue of the P3 schools, the issue of the policy that the Department of Education is trying to advance. None of those things, Mr. Speaker, have been dealt with. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I'll say it's so ironic that a previous member in this House from the NDP caucus stood up in her place and says, we want P3 schools. We don't care how they're paid for. We don't care how you get the money. We just want the school. Mr. Speaker, there's a little question of consistency here, you know, on principle, on logic, what you say and what you do. With that having been said, Mr. Speaker, I'll close my remarks.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Education. Close debate on Bill number 48. Move third reading. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Debate on Bill 48. I want to thank the members of the opposition for their support of this, and I expect most of the members of the third party will see it as a good thing too. Mr. Speaker, just a couple of informational items in beginning my comments. First of all, the Halifax School Board has revised its figures to about 50% of where they were before, and the department will work with the Halifax Regional School Board to address any difficulty that arises. And secondly, I think it's not really appropriate to put all of the P3 school partners in the same boat. For example, with the Ashford group, the school use has been worked out with them, and it's both the same policy as it is in the others. Anyway. This is about community use of publicly owned schools, and it's part of the Learning for Life plan, and it also now includes the opportunity for seniors groups 65 years and older to use these facilities without rental charge and subject only to out-of-pocket expenses that the facility owners might have. Mr. Speaker, in terms of, I hear the honourable member from Cape Breton West talking about liability, and I would think liability would be an issue regardless of where a group met. But anyway, with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, this is a good piece of legislation. I look forward to its unanimous passage.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 48. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 48, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
Or the bill do pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, please call Bill number 70, the Municipal Law Amendment 2004 Act.
Bill number 70, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill number 70.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 70. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 70, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18, the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. Chapter 300, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act. And Chapter 302 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Grants Act.
Or the bill do pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 73, the Justice Administration Amendment 2004 Act.
Bill number 73, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll rise very briefly to move third reading of this bill. I would like to thank all members of the House for the support that they have heretofore given to the bill. Mr. Speaker, I know that there were comments about the omnibus character of the legislation, and we will attempt to reflect that in future on the matters, and I do appreciate that I think part of law, of course, is important word choice, but Mr. Speaker, you know, in seriousness, I do appreciate the support that we've gotten from the opposition parties on the bill. I believe it will improve in a number of areas the law in Nova Scotia, and with that, I'd move third reading.
Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise briefly to speak on Bill 73 and exactly to the point that the Minister of Justice raised himself. Since 1999, when the government was first elected, I have spoken against the idea of bringing in these Justice Administration Acts and changing a whole number of different provincial statutes through one bill. I remember, I believe in the early years, the Justice Administration Act was up to 25, 30 pages in length, and it was numerous acts that were being changed. Some it were minor housekeeping changes, others it was significant changes being made to those acts. Now, that is something under our Parliament that is easier to do when you have a majority government. It's not an issue because the opposition can holler all they want. You don't really have to listen to them, and you can keep doing your Justice Administration Acts, which I believe is what happened in 1999 when I first raised it as an issue, because they kept doing it every year since and have done it again this year. But I think the message was clearly sent. I believe my colleagues in the NDP caucus, both the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage and the member from Halifax Fairview, have expressed concern also about bringing in these Justice Administration Acts. Now, one of the things I can suggest, Mr. Speaker, is there are two options. Either the minister can break these changes down into separate acts, or something which I know would be completely radical for the Minister of Justice. He may actually want to invite the critics of the opposition parties to meet with his department, go through some of these changes, and address any concerns there are prior to the bill being tabled, and then leave it to the opposition caucuses to go through and try to figure out for themselves what each of the changes are. So I know that's a fairly radical suggestion, but I think at the end of the day, it may be able to resolve some of the concerns which we have raised. This is a minority situation. We do expect that we are going to do our job on all pieces of legislation. This bill number 73 changes up to 13 provincial statutes are being changed in this one piece of legislation. As I said, in the most part, in this case, there were minor changes, but in the past, there has been significant changes that have gone under the purview of the Justice Administration Act. I do hope that when we sit again, the minister will address this concern, and the alternative, if he does not, I do hope that the concerns that were raised by the NDP caucus, that they will raise those concerns again and join us in holding the minister accountable on these types of bills. So with that, our caucus has supported this legislation going through with the reservation which I've just given, and with that, I move that Bill 73 move on to third reading and continue.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice to close debate in Bill number 73. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to close debate and move third reading.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 73. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 73, entitled an act respecting the administration of justice.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 58, the Mechanics Lien Act?
Bill number 58, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to rise very briefly to repeat the comments that were made earlier in the course of Committee of the Whole House, and really my speaking is to thank a number of people. Obviously, the Law Reform Commission of Nova Scotia for the work they've done in the bill. I'd like to thank the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, and in particular Carol McCullough, for the work that she's done in this bill. I would also like to thank the official opposition, and particularly the Leader of the Opposition, who has been a very strong advocate of reforming mechanics lien, or builder's lien as it will soon be, a law in Nova Scotia. I'd like to thank the third party for their support as well. They supported the bill at all stages. This is really a situation where I think all parties involved in the building industry in Nova Scotia, whether they are the contractors or building suppliers, whether they are the workers on those sites, whether they are lawyers involved in representing their clients, believe the law in Nova Scotia will be better and more consistent with national standards. And with that, I'd close my debate. And
the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I won't be long, but I do just wanted to speak on this bill because it was one of those things that when I first came into this House that I started to talk about, and it came out of the experience that I had as a lawyer in a small firm, in a storefront legal firm that was trying to provide services to small business people who were plumbers, and who were pipe fitters, and who were carpenters, and who were drywall installers, and all those guys with their toolbox and with a couple of employees in a truck who were around trying to make a living and provide for their family. And the reality was that oftentimes these were the very people who were getting seen off as a result of ineffective and flawed legislation. So there's a certain amount of pride that I take today in seeing this come forward. This bill, like any bill, of course, is not perfect, and as it works its way through common usage with people in the trades, as it works its way through the courts, it may be that there will be flaws that will be noticed. And I remember, and I was reflecting on the comment of the Minister of Justice, and he talked about how sometimes people would go back to extend the lien period. They would run back and they would, pound another nail or screw in another screw, just to say that was the last day that they were on the site, so they could extend their lien period. And I remember one of the favorites of one of my clients was we called it the doorknob in the toolbox. Right, he would just leave a doorknob off and then would go back and keep it in his toolbox, then go back and screw it on so that he would extend his lien period. So and so that kind of nonsense should be unnecessary. And I'm very much hopeful that this bill will do that. I'm very much hopeful that what it means, as I said before, the bill is really about a very simple concept, which is you work, you get paid. And I'm very hopeful that in the end, all those day-to-day tradesmen out there, all those people who shared the experience that I shared and the frustration with the then Mechanics Lien Act and what now will be the Builders Lien Act, will see progress in this legislation because it is truly about the operation of small business, and it's about helping suppliers and contractors to be able to make a living and ply their trade and support their families. And that's what this is about. We're going to be supporting it, and I'm pleased to see that this day has arrived. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just briefly on Bill number 58, I also want to certainly thank the Law Reform Commission for the work that they have done on this legislation, and I use it also as, again, a reminder to the Minister of Justice and to the government of the important role that the Law Reform Commission continues to play in this province, and the need to ensure that they do have adequate funding to continue in their work, which I believe over the years has certainly brought forward strong legislation here and has helped us update a number of our provincial statutes. I also want to take the opportunity again to thank Carol McCullough and all the members of the Construction Association of Nova Scotia. As I've said before, this is one of those pieces of legislation which I think all organizations that want to bring acts to this legislature should follow the same example. Carol met with the critics of each caucus, a number of MLAs in each caucus, in fact, on regards to this legislation prior to it arriving here in the House to discuss the changes they were looking for, to answer any questions that we might have had, and gave us the opportunity to be prepared when the legislation arrived here. And I think that made the passage of this bill that much smoother. I think that's why you'll probably see unanimous support for this legislation. I think that is the proper way that legislation should be brought here to this province, and I'm pleased that the government has gone forward with it. As has been said, Speaker, every time we have Small Business Week, we are provided with the figures of, I believe, 90% of all businesses here in Nova Scotia are considered to be small businesses, and they are the economic engine of our province. And it's important that we put in place the proper framework and the proper protection so that when they are applying their trade and that they are working on different projects, that they are certainly protected and that they do get paid in a timely fashion, that the guarantees are put in place to do that. So I'm pleased to see that this legislation has been updated. Again, I congratulate the Construction Association, Law Reform Commission, and look forward to seeing this bill enacted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Justice to close debate on Bill number 58.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 58. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 58, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics Lien Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call private and local bills for third reading?
Private and local bills for third reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 54?
Bill number 54, the Honourable Member of Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move Bill 54, St. Peter's Evangelical Lutheran Church. Thank you.
House ready for the motion is for third reading of Bill number 54. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 54, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 35, the Acts of 1881, an Act to incorporate St. Peter's Evangelical Lutheran Church of Chester, Nunberg County.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 55?
Bill number 55, the Honourable Member of Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I very much have the privilege of moving the bill called Lenahan, Municipality of the District of Chester Retiring Allowance Act. Mr. Speaker, very briefly, it's the people, this request is made from the municipality of Chester, and they very much appreciate it. And I would like to thank also the local and private members, Bill, who've blessed it too. Thank you.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 55. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 55, entitled An Act to Authorize the Municipality of the District of Chester to provide a retiring allowance for Barry Lenihan.
Or the bill do pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 56?
Bill number 56, the Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, for third reading, I would move Bill number 56, Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 56. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 56, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 148 of the Acts of 1930, an Act to incorporate the Nova Scotia Fish and Game Protective Association and county or district fish and game associations.
Or the bill do pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 60?
Bill number 60, Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I move this bill be now read a third time.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 60. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 60, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 87, the Acts of 1915, an Act respecting the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company, and Chapter 105, the Acts of 1981, an Act to confer additional powers upon Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
Order the bill to pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 69?
Bill number 69, the Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, for third reading, I have the pleasure of moving Bill number 69, the United Way of Halifax Region Act. Thank you.
This is the third reading of Bill number 69. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 69, title An Act to Amend Chapter 73, the Acts of 1972, an Act to incorporate the Halifax-Dartmouth United Appeal.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Would you please call the order of business private members' public bills?
Private members' public bills.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 61?
Bill number 61. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and speak just for a few quick minutes on Bill 61, an Act to amend Chapter 466 of the Revised Statutes 1989 of the Theatres and Amusements Act. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first mention again the reason for bringing this bill forward was through a personal experience relating to my youngest son, who went out on his own and purchased a game rated mature, which is 17 and above, in fact, Grand Theft Auto, and he was 14 years at the time. So when that happened, Mr. Speaker, I went back to the store and questioned how that had occurred, because I thought there were mechanisms in place to protect our children and youth from renting these very violent video games, Mr. Speaker. So I guess you could say that necessity is the mother of invention in this case. And I'd like to just point out a few things, Mr. Speaker. What's in place right now for the protection of our children? Right now, we do control the violence that our children see at the movies, Mr. Speaker. But unfortunately, there is nothing in place now to restrict access to violent video games in Nova Scotia. When this first occurred, Mr. Speaker, I did do some checking on my own, and it did appear to me that most of the retail outlets felt that they had no legal right to ask for ID, and certainly that turned out to be the case. There are studies that are showing us that in the United States, 78% of stores do allow unaccompanied minors to purchase games rated mature. So it is definitely an issue within the United States and in Nova Scotia. Studies are showing that there's a correlation between exposure to violent video and computer games and various forms of hostile and antisocial behavior. So as far as some background information, we did find out that the stores were not able to enforce the ESRB rating system that they were voluntarily using. So they had a system in place which was totally voluntary, but they were not able to enforce that, Mr. Speaker. Also, we found out that the federal government, in fact, the justice ministers had agreed that a rating system for video games is necessary to reduce our children's exposure to the violent media in today's society. So what we've come down to now, Mr. Speaker, is that we can't wait in Nova Scotia for that to happen. And I'm very proud to say that I'm hoping here today that this government will lead the way, and that we will show that we feel that families in Nova Scotia are very important to us, and that also the protection of our children is a #1 priority, Mr. Speaker. We're just really catching up with technology here, and we're going to be able to, enforce age restrictions on the rental and purchase of video games. We'll be giving businesses the legal authority that they need to enforce restricted access, Mr. Speaker. So the bill would just amend the Theatres and Amusements Act so that we would be able to establish a definition of video games, and it would set the ESRB as a provincial standard while still allowing the Cabinet to make regulations to add further standards or classifications if they're necessary in the future, because we know things do move fast in the field of technology. It'll ensure that the retail outlets sell only games that have been rated by the ESRB or some other classification that may be adopted later on through the regulations if necessary. And also that the bill would come into force 6 months after passage. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to say that I would like to thank all the parties involved for the cooperation in this and all the work that the government staff have put into this bill, and also the Minister of Environment and Labour. He's been very gracious in all of his dealings with myself and everyone else. So I do look forward to seeing this become legislation, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, I move Bill number 61.
Motion is for third reading. Order, please. Motion is for third reading, Bill number 61. Recorded vote has been called for. Are the whips ready? We'll ring the bells till the whips are satisfied.